Well, good morning. I thought I'd share just exactly why I learned to read and understand, translate Pali and Sanskrit myself. So I just finished an excellent course off of Audible in the Great Courses selection. This one was about the Irish literature, the Irish culture. It was beautiful. It relates to James Joyce and the whole study that I'm doing that Nietzsche's Zarathustra, Carl Jung's Red Book, and James Joyce, his Finnegan's Wake, are all an attempt at a source, not a source for meaning, but a source for an understanding to what and where we find meaning. And so, just to give you an example, and this is just the funniest thing. So I decided after finishing that Irish, I thought, well, let's take a look and see what there is. And there was a course that I saved on mindfulness. And I've mentioned before reading the book, Make a Mindfulness. And one of the biggest takeaways is people selling mindfulness to the military so soldiers can mow people down with a machine gun mindfully. Or, well, it gets worse from there. So this course opens up. It's supposed to be an expert, obviously. Ronald Siegel. I'm not familiar with how much of an expert he is, but he quotes another expert on this topic, John Donne. He's supposed to be a Buddhist scholar. And they talk about mindfulness. And they go, well, mindfulness is the word sati in Pali. And, okay, not really. He does properly explain that it means to remember, but here's where the utter, complete, and total failure happens. He says, well, what is it to remember? He says, not like remembering your memories, or he says it's to remember to remember. I'm like, what? Because that's not it, but we'll get to that. He proceeds to go on and give the exact same scenario that was in McMindfulness, but in this case he talks about, well, imagine, John Donne supposedly was saying this, imagine a sniper who's mindful, his mind wanders, he comes back to task. Well, you're not wrong. I mean, if that's what your job is, certainly the job is probably not the most conducive to someone who might need to search up mindfulness, but at the same time I would argue that's what we need to teach everybody, not just soldiers, not soldiers, but everybody. We need to begin from the very start. But he proceeds to go on a big, long diatribe talking about how, well, you can't just, be mindful of whatever you're doing. And he proceeds to talk about the Dunning-Kruger effect, how, this inverse correlation between how good you are at something, or how knowledgeable you are, how experienced you are, inversely relates to how good you think you are. I've talked about this till I'm blue in the face. But it's a perfect example of the Dunning-Kruger effect, because this gentleman is selling a course on Audible, and he doesn't really even know what he's talking about. It's the first chapter, and he's already included somebody else, making them look like they don't even know what they're talking about. Because sati, it does mean to remember, but it doesn't mean to remember. It means to remember the three marks of existence. Right? It remembers that, it's not self. There is no permanence in this world, and that suffering has a source. This dukkha has a source, right? You're reminded to remember about the Noble Eightfold Path, the truth of suffering, the truth of self, and the truth of impermanence. So it's sati sampajanya. I've talked about this a lot. Sati is the remember, not the mindful. Mindful is the whole sentence, sati sampajanya. You can read this in the Satipatthana Sutra, one of the earliest Buddhist sutra, which blows my mind that these supposed scholars don't understand such a simple, easily Googled fact. Sati sampajanya is this idea of sati, to remember about what you've been taught, the marks of existence and the Noble Eightfold Path, right? That we are the cause of our suffering, because we believe that there is such a thing as permanence. We believe that there is such a thing as a self. And, well, we tend to make it worse because we expect so much more than what we should. Sampajanya is that important aspect that always gets missed. It's that constant, ever vigilant, clear light insight, as the Japanese tend to translate it. So it's being aware, as they say, but aware of what you need to remember and how it impacts your existence, your suffering, and your everyday activities, karma. So mindfulness is not sati. I've said this before about John Vervaeke, who gets that wrong, plus he gets phronesis wrong. He translates it as, what does he translate it as? I think he even translates it as sati. But it's not, absolutely not. It's anumana, right? To come to an understanding. I mean, induction would be like satori in Japanese, but in this case, we're just going to stick to the cause at hand. This is in a course available on Audible with reputable professors teaching this, and even they get it wrong. As I said, the teacher opens with sati, but you can't just remember. It's a different kind of remembering. Well, yeah, it's a very specific kind of remember about the marks of existence and the source of suffering, the nature of self, and the nature of impermanence. Right? So sati sampajanya, that sampajanya is your focus, your awareness, your true mindfulness. So arguably, mindfulness is the sampajana. Right? It's not the sati. But to proceed and talk about Dunning-Kruger, oh my God, I just couldn't help myself. I had to record an episode about how absolutely ignorant even the most educated people on the planet. I probably should have listened to the John McWhorter course on how unique the English language is, but I didn't think it'd be that interesting. Well, I'm kidding. I assumed I'd need to do the mindful course to get an idea of, what's out there, what's being taught, and lo and behold, I'm like, Jace, I should be doing my own course is what I should be doing. Because arguably, if you read the book McMindfulness, I hope this course gets into this, the fact that when they open it with such an utter failure as to the subject matter at hand, mindfulness, they got it completely wrong in the very beginning. Doesn't bode well for what they have lined up, am I right? But yeah, I thought I'd share that. So Sati Sampajanya is actually mindfulness, but it means to remember the marks of existence, that you're not a self, you just attach to these preferences on a moment-to-moment basis. The self is just as impermanent as anything else, and a belief in these two things, impermanence and the nature of self being something other than impermanent, as Vasubandhu said, upakara, that which is as close at hand, right? Think of it as nothing more than an item you wear for but a moment and discard. And they both tend to be the ultimate source of our suffering, our dukkha, right? So the source of the suffering is also the solution, or right, how to end our suffering. Our modern malaise is arguably, the modern malaise now is people are doing practices that are either they've been sold a bill of goods, convinced that it works when it doesn't, or they purposely don't practice it in such a way that it would work so as to continue to suffer. Well, that wouldn't be anything new now, would it? Because the very nature of the teaching, the Chittamatra, the source of all our suffering, is the self. There's no two ways about that. As well as our diluted understanding of what the nature of self and existence and impermanence, but it really does source directly to the self. Yeah, we're our own worst enemies.